Two cucumber plants started side by side, yet only one towers overhead, thick with fruit, while its twin struggles, yellow and sickly. The only difference is a homemade brew of yeast and sugar poured once at the roots, and it triggered a surge so fast the gardener had to brace the vines. This is the story of the biological hack you will not find in any store, because living organisms cannot sit on a shelf. But can a $1 packet of yeast truly transform your entire harvest overnight? The evidence starts with a single, explosive experiment. The gardener's logbook begins with two identical seeds dropped into fresh soil on the same cool morning in early May. Each plant received the same sunlight, the same water, the same measured care, except for a single watering. On day 7, one plant received 1 quart of homemade yeast brew poured at the base. The other received plain water. By day 12, the difference was already visible. The control plant labeled A stood just 8 inches tall, its leaves tinged with yellow, and the edges curling as if bracing against invisible stress. Plant B, the yeast-fed twin, surged past a foot in height, new leaves unfurling with a rich, glossy green. The gardener notes in the margin that plant B was growing like mad, and the gardener had never seen anything like it. The daily entries read almost like a race. On day 15, plant B stretched to 18 inches and was already sending out side shoots. On day 20, the first flowers appeared. By day 28, the control plant was barely knee-high, its stems thin, while plant B towered at 40 inches, thick as a broom handle and heavy with blooms. The logbook records the moment the gardener was forced to add a second stake just to keep the yeast-fed vine upright. When harvest time arrived, the scale told the final story. Plant A produced 3 cucumbers, together weighing just under a pound. Plant B yielded 9 fruit, each plump and firm, for a total of 3.1 pounds. The fruit count and weight were logged in ink alongside the date July 12th. The experiment ends with a simple conclusion. 1 watering, 1 ingredient, and the yield more than triple what the control produced. The numbers are there in black and white. No special soil, no secret compost, just a $1 packet of yeast and a spoonful of sugar. The gardener's notes captured the disbelief that they had never had a harvest like this. Same seeds, same care, the only difference was the yeast. Across gardens and small farms worldwide, the act of brewing up a living fertilizer is anything but new. In the hills of South Korea, farmers have long relied on fermented plant juice, FPJ, crafted by packing wild greens with brown sugar and letting microbes work their magic in a shaded jar for a week or more. The resulting liquid, alive with yeasts and bacteria, gets splashed on fields to spark growth and resilience. JADO, a modern natural farming movement, simplifies the process even further. There, a scoop of rice flour or a splash of rice wash water is stirred with sugar and left to ferment, building up a potent yeast culture in just a few days. Both methods share a common thread, harnessing the invisible workforce of microbes to unlock nutrients, boost root mass, and shield crops from stress. In English cottage gardens, comfrey teas have their own legacy. For generations, gardeners have chopped comfrey leaves, soaked them in water, sometimes with a sprinkle of sugar to speed things along, and waited as the mixture frothed and darkened. The bubbling and the smell are signs that fermentation is in full swing. These brews, rich in potassium and natural growth promoters, have been poured around tomatoes, cucumbers, and beans for centuries. Even in Soviet-era dacha gardens, handwritten manuals describe yeasty ferments for quick, cheap plant feeding, when commercial fertilizers were out of reach. What unites all these traditions is the belief that living, bubbling ferments do something bottled chemicals cannot. They activate the soil, feed roots directly, and set off a chain reaction of growth. The yeast and sugar brew at the heart of this story is not an isolated trick or a modern fad. It is the latest echo of a global practice, adapted for speed and simplicity. From the rice paddies of Korea to the allotments of England, gardeners have trusted fermentation to stretch their harvests and revive tired soils. Now, with a packet of baker's yeast and a spoonful of sugar, anyone can tap into that same living legacy right from the kitchen counter. A kitchen counter becomes the workshop. 1 tablespoon of dry active yeast, any brand, even the expired packet from the back of the drawer, drops into a clean jar. 2 tablespoons of plain granulated sugar follow, feeding the yeast. Next comes 1 quart of warm water, not hot enough to burn a finger, and not cold enough to chill the mix. Temperature matters. Too hot, the yeast dies. Too cold, the yeast goes to sleep. Stir until the sugar dissolves and the yeast is suspended, cloudy and beige. The lid sits on top, loose enough to let air and gas escape. Do not seal it tight. If you tighten it, pressure from fermentation could build until the jar pops. Let the mixture sit on the counter for at least 2 hours. For best results, let it work up to 12 hours. The sign of success is a thick faux am on top, like the head on a fresh poured beer. That foam is living proof the biology is awake and multiplying. If there is no foam, check the temperature or try a new packet. Yeast is cheap. Once the foam peaks, the brew is ready. Never pour this concentrated mix straight onto plants. It is far too strong. Instead, fill a 5-gallon bucket with water and add the entire quart of yeast brew. This creates the perfect dilution, strong enough to feed and gentle enough to avoid burning roots. Stir well and use immediately before the microbes settle or the mix goes flat. The process is simple, fast, and costs less than $1. No special tools, no waiting for weeks, just yeast, sugar, and warm water, transformed in a single afternoon into a living potion. The next step is optional additives, but the base recipe alone is enough to trigger a visible growth surge in almost any vegetable bed. For gardeners aiming to push their results even further, a handful of household ingredients can turn the basic yeast brew into a complete, balanced feed. Each additive brings a specific nutrient to the table, targeted, measurable, and cheap. Wood ash is first. Sifted from a clean fireplace or wood stove, it is packed with potassium, the element plants use to move water, build strong stems, and set heavy fruit. The right dose is 1 to 2 cups of fine wood ash, stirred into a 5-gallon bucket of diluted yeast water. More is not better. Too much can raise soil pH and lock out other nutrients. Stick to the low end if your soil is already alkaline, or skip this step if you are unsure. Next comes Epsom salt, known to chemists as magnesium sulfate. Just 1 tablespoon per 5-gallon batch supplies enough magnesium for lush, dark green leaves. Magnesium sits at the heart of every chlorophyll molecule, so a little goes a long way. If your plants already show deep color, you can have the dose. Sprinkle the Epsom salt in, stir until dissolved, and move on. Eggshell powder rounds out the mix. 2 tablespoons finely ground deliver calcium for strong cell walls and sturdy stems. Calcium is slow to release, but the mild acidity from the yeast fermentation helps break it down. If you are short on eggshells, oyster shell or garden lime can substitute, but always measure carefully. Too much calcium can interfere with other minerals. The full recipe now covers the major bases: potassium for fruit, magnesium for leaves, calcium for structure, all delivered by a living solution that feeds roots and soil microbes at the same time. Each ingredient is optional, but together they create a super feed that rivals anything in a bottle at a fraction of the cost. Always mix thoroughly, use the solution fresh, and test on a single plant before treating an entire bed. With these tweaks, the yeast brew becomes more than a growth hack. It is a complete living meal for your garden. Dr. Anika Nguyen, a plant physiologist at the University of Minnesota, traces the power of baker's yeast to the microscopic level. Saccharomyces cerevisiae, the same organism that makes bread rise, becomes a biological engine when introduced to soil. Once activated by sugar and warmth, these single-celled fungi begin producing a suite of compounds that plants recognize as growth signals. Chief among them are cytokinins and auxins, hormones that in plants trigger cell division and root elongation. Dr. Nguyen explains that when roots absorb these hormones, they behave as if given a green light to expand and branch, drawing in more water and minerals from the soil. The result is a root system that grows deeper and denser, supporting taller stems and larger leaves above ground. Dr. Mateo Alvarez, a soil microbiologist, points to a second mechanism: nutrient unlocking. As yeast cells multiply and die off, their cell walls break down, releasing phosphorus and nitrogen in forms that plant roots can absorb instantly. In laboratory trials, wheat and sugar beet treated with yeast-based solutions showed 20 to 30% higher yields compared to untreated controls. The effect is strongest in soils that are low in available nutrients, where yeast acts as a living bridge between locked-up minerals and hungry roots. Dr. Alvarez notes that even a single watering with fermented yeast water can tip the balance for struggling plants, providing a flush of accessible nutrients just as they enter critical growth stages. Beneath the surface, yeast also works as a biological shield. By colonizing the root zone, Saccharomyces outcompetes many harmful bacteria and fungi, forming a protective barrier that blocks disease-causing invaders. This probiotic effect is well documented in greenhouse studies, where plants treated with yeast fermentations show fewer root diseases and recover faster from stress. The benefits extend beyond nutrition. Yeast activity in the rhizosphere helps plants regulate water loss, making them more resilient to drought and heat. Dr. Nguyen describes it as a living insurance policy, a microbial partnership that boosts growth, shields against pathogens, and helps plants weather environmental swings, all triggered by a handful of yeast and sugar from the kitchen shelf. Bottled fertilizer lines the shelves at every garden center, promising instant results and tidy solutions. Yet not a single jug contains a living, bubbling yeast brew, like the one mixed on a kitchen counter. The reason comes down to biology and business. Living yeast never stops working. Once sugar and water wake it up, the cells ferment, multiplying and releasing carbon dioxide. In a sealed bottle, that gas has nowhere to go. Pressure builds, and within days the cap bulges or the container leaks. If left long enough, the bottle can burst. Even vented caps cannot keep up, and the liquid inside quickly spoils, turning sour or flat as the yeast runs out of food. Commercial fertilizers avoid this problem by selling salts, dead minerals that sit inert on a shelf for years. No gas, no spoilage, no risk. But that stability comes at a price. Synthetic formulas rely on mined or manufactured chemicals, processed and packaged for shipping and storage. The cost climbs quickly. A 5-pound bag of name-brand fertilizer can run $30 to $50, and concentrated biostimulant bottles fetch even more. In contrast, the ingredients for a home-brewed yeast solution cost less than $1. One packet of baker's yeast, a scoop of sugar, and tap water create a gallon of living feed for pennies. There is no patent, no proprietary blend, just a recipe anyone can make in minutes. Garden supply companies cannot profit from something so simple and perishable. To put live yeast water on a store shelf would mean constant refrigeration, vented packaging, and rapid turnover, driving up costs and shrinking margins. Instead, the industry sticks to what it can control: shelf-stable products that last for seasons, not days. For gardeners willing to mix their own, this gap is an advantage. The living brew cannot be boxed and sold, but it can be made fresh at home, on demand, for a fraction of the price. If the economics are clear, biology does not fit in a bottle, but it fits perfectly into the rhythms of a frugal, results-driven garden. Every gardener wants a miracle, but the real gains have numbers behind them. In controlled field trials, wheat and sugar beet treated with yeast-based solutions produced yields 20 to 30% higher than untreated crops. That is not just a fluke. It is a repeatable benchmark, confirmed across different soils and climates. The gardener's logbook with the 6-foot cucumber is an outlier, the kind of result that turns heads and sparks curiosity. For most, the jump is measurable but more modest. A 20% increase means 5 tomatoes instead of 4, or an extra pound of beans from the same patch. Over a season, that difference adds up. Safety matters as much as results. The yeast brew, even when diluted, is potent. Too much, too often, can stress roots or invite pests. The sweet spot is a single application every 7 to 14 days. More frequent doses do not double the effect. They risk tipping the balance, especially in young or potted plants. Always start with a test. Treat one plant, watch for a week, then scale up if growth surges without signs of burn. Pale leaves, wilting, or blackened roots mean the solution is too strong or the soil is already rich enough. Dial back the concentration or stretch the interval between applications. Variability is part of the experiment. Some soils, low in nutrients or microbial life, respond dramatically. Others already fertile may show only a subtle boost. Crop type matters too. Leafy greens and fruiting vegetables tend to benefit most, while root crops are less responsive. Climate, watering habits, and even the brand of yeast can nudge results in either direction. That is why the next step is not just to take these numbers at face value, but to run your own trial. Log your starting conditions, measure your harvests, and compare. The recipe is simple, but the data you collect is what moves the story forward. For every gardener willing to try, the invitation stands. Replicate, record, and share what happens. The promise is not magic, but a living experiment, one that grows with every new set of hands in the dirt. Today, chemical fertilizer sales still top $200 billion a year. Even as living solutions like yeast water transform gardens for pennies. The barrier is not biology, it is habit and industry inertia. As food prices rise and droughts worsen, the real revolution starts in the soil, not the store aisle. Growth this immediate is not a miracle, it is a choice. What will you feed your garden next season?